There's no such thing as cheap food, right? What we pay in the grocery stores that's not good for us, we end up paying for in medical bills. There's the theory of, I've put all this food on the table. Now, how much will my kids actually eat? And
that's a good analogy.
And that's kind of the same thing. In the soil test, we're saying, theoretically, here's all the food that's available for the plants to eat. But what did they actually eat? And that's what SAP analysis tells us. There's also signatures in the infrared spectrum. If you remember the old 50s diners that had the neon flash light that says, come dine here, right? That's essentially what is happening in the in the world of the insect's quote unquote vision. When you change those signatures, you've essentially also turned the light switch off. He had his citrus tested next to a conventional store-bought citrus, sent them off to a lab, very expensive testing. His came back and just even blew his mind. His nutrient levels are like way off the charts. You've got times 4, times 8, times 30 levels of different nutrients. I'll say my own controversial statement, which is in 2025, I don't think anybody should be wrestling with aphid pressure. It's that easy to solve.
Welcome to the Market Gardener Podcast, where we believe that small-scale farming is changing the world. Join us for insightful conversations with people who are working to build a better future, a future with less mass production and more production by the masses. The revolution is in the field. Let's get digging.
All right, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Today we have a really, really interesting guest, a special guest that flew from far away, and I want to thank you about this, Kish Johnson from Advancing Ecoculture.
Good to be here.
Yeah.
It's great to be here.
Thank you for making the trip.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad the weather wasn't quite as brutal as it was a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, you were just telling me that you're back from India.
Yep.
That's a far away land.
Yeah, it was some serious flying time for sure, but really excited about what's going on there, what we're doing there. So yeah.
Before Chris sets the stage, because that's what he always does. We met one another at a farming conference in it was
Germany,
at the World Organic Forum.
That's right. Yeah.
And what I told my team when we were looking for a guest, I said, "Hey, I met this guy. He was one of the most eloquent speakers that I've heard in a long time. Really appreciated the conference that you gave there. And then we hung out, we connected. I think we kind of became friends.
I think so.
And I'm super happy that you're in my hometown. Visiting. You just went to the Bite Betrave, and now we're having a dinner tonight here. So
very spoiled, feeling very looked after. Thank you for having me.
It's great. It's great.
Yeah.
And we connected well just before you got here.
Yeah.
We're already friends now.
Yeah.
Share some similar authors that we enjoy. And interests and hobbies.
Most people will know your organization from John Kempf.
Yep.
It's really famous.
Yeah, Advancing Eco-Agriculture.
And so I think we're going to be asking you about that.
Okay.
For sure.
That sounds like a plan. Yeah.
So to start us off then?
Yeah, let's do it.
You've said before that the Regen Ag message is a hopeful message.
Yep.
What is that message and why is it so hopeful in your mind?
It's a lot of things compiled into a simple statement. I think it's hopeful because, number one, there's a way for farmers to be profitable in what we do, and also that there are solutions out there for making regenerative actually truly sustainable for farmers long term, and that starts with the economy of being a farmer. But also, a big part of the work that we do is working on crop immunity to pests and diseases. Means that those large-scale issues in mainstream agriculture are also solvable in a way that's truly regenerative and profitable at the same time. So I think that's very hopeful.
Yeah, you were just bringing it back to India. You were just there, and you were explaining to me that the reason why AGA is there is because in India, the organic movement is having a hard time fighting disease pressure.
Yep.
And then you guys are there to troubleshoot some of the soil problems and see what could be done to solve these.
That's right. Yeah. The gift for what we do and therefore the gift for every farmer, right, is that when you use nutrition to create solutions for those pest disease issues, when you get that right, that also translates to the quality of the crop that you're growing. And now even more, we were just touching upon this before you joined, the idea around nutrient density. So, when you get one approach that then, partakes or contributes towards another end result that we're really interested in too.
Yeah.
That's a two for the price of one deal.
You're fighting back disease and pests, but you're also bringing more nutrients to the crop.
Exactly.
For human health.
Exactly.
Or for animal health.
Yeah, that additional energy that it has for its immune system, the additional energy there goes towards the nutrition. That's a win-win.
And the only thing you have to do to solve these big fundamental human problem is soil ecology?
Yeah, I would break it down two ways. I think, one of the things that we've tried sort of articulating in our agronomy is it's really important with the underpinning of farmers being profitable, that we tackle this idea that there may be a J curve economically in a transitional period. In other words, saying you're guaranteed to lose money in this transitionary period. Well, if we're smart and we have the right approach, that we can really begin to mitigate that as a reality. And so if I pull back to the overall AEA approach or perspective, yes, it's absolutely building this robust microbiome. We know that the best form of nutrients from the soil for a plant is in a biologically available form, where that biology does all of the work of making it plant available. In that process, and it may take a bit of time to build out that microbiome, what are we going to do with the pest issues or the nutrient imbalances? And so the second piece to that is balancing the nutrition in the crop during the season as we continue to work on building this healthy biology in the soil. So, yeah.
You've opened up a lot of doors for that I would want to jump off on all at the same time. But I'm afraid we're gonna go too all over if I let that happen. So I want to just step back from. We'll get to talking about, I guess, the specifics of AEA and what you kind of bring to the table in terms of the real nitty gritty science of what you offer. But I want to just go back to that idea of the J curve and the idea of the fact that we don't have enough farmers. And this is something I've heard John Kempf say. It's something that our company's vision and mission is the multiplication of small farms, so more farmers. What does regenerative agriculture and what you do have to do with increasing the amount of farmers? And what is this J curve? Why is the J curve such a problem? Why does it matter that these conventional farmers aren't switching over? And will that create more can you speak to that at all?
Yeah. Let me piece a couple of pieces together with that. I think so. Let's put it in practical terms. If I'm a farmer and I learn, if you like, the underpinnings of good farm practices, let's call them even the pillars of regenerative farming, right? I want to begin to implement them. But what every farmer hopes, at least, is that in terms of overall health, whether he inherited that or he's been on it for 20, 30 years, let's say, that maybe it's a +5, hopefully not 0, as opposed to the reality when you look at how degraded agricultural land is, -25 or -50. And so if your agricultural land starting point, regardless of the good things that you've been doing, is -50, and I want to transition and build these living ecosystems to start working for me as a farmer, how long does that take? Where is everybody around the same starting point? And what are the ways that we can expedite change and speed up that change to where, we really can have a year-over-year experience of seeing biology work for us in the soil, as opposed to just like, I'm going to all of a sudden not do any more tilling. I'm going to, apply compost teas and all of these things and sit back and expect the system all of a sudden to work for me.
Yeah.
And how real is that if my starting point, for example, has been -50? So having data tools to substantiate, and John will say this a lot, right? And this is true for us as a company. We need to earn the right to understand that we can reduce herbicides, pesticides, fungicides, not just sort of take this wild shoot from the hip cold turkey approach. That all of a sudden, because I'm ethically driven or morally driven to make change.
That doesn't solve everything.
It doesn't solve it.
It solves anything, actually.
Yeah, exactly.
It's still science.
Yeah.
Are you seeing more people transitioning or more new farmers kind of creating that transition on previously conventional land?
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think it's a mix, right? Because I think I think what regenerative farm, and this is perhaps controversial because there's always going to be actors that, have slightly different motivations for being on the regenerative bandwagon, right? I think what regenerative agriculture can do is it can open up the ramp or the road to more farmers being able to move in that direction. It's less restrictive, let's say. It also, though, is giving farmers more tools in the toolbox to choose from. So even, let's say, if you're 90% conventional, there's still value in some of those regenerative tools that can make a very big difference to your farm. So then, what makes that question hard to answer is they say, well, is where you get into the puritanical kind of perspective. Yeah. This is like, oh, if you don't have livestock on your farm, you're not regenerative, or, whatever. It's like, yeah, that's a different conversation, and I understand the importance of that conversation is. But I think understanding whether there's more people transitioning over from conventional, I think it's more the case of there's more awareness of what those tools are that can make a difference than ever before. And of course, new people coming into farm life, and with the ability of this podcast, let's say, and to give that information, and the Canopy leading training institute there as well. That means we're equipping people quicker with these tools in their hands.
That 20 years ago, people just, if it wasn't like one of the most blunt thing that I've heard so many times, like next to FQT Farm, which is the research farm that I started in 2015, it's the biggest, I would say, lettuce farmland outside of California in North America. Like a lot of salad mix, a lot of lettuce is grown there, like in black soil that is like 4 or 5 meter deep. Okay. And these guys would come and visit my farm, and they would not believe me that I was growing lettuce without putting anything on it. They're just like, that's not possible in their mind, because for them, if they plant anything without supporting it with herbicides or with fungicides, there's no crop. It's not possible because there's no biology in the soil.
Yeah.
And they've never kind of made the switch to thinking there could be biology, and if there could be, how do I get there? And then now there's solutions like yours that are coming there to say, yeah, rotation, cover crop, but let's look at the nutrients in the soil, the minerals. What can we do? Correcting them. There's science behind it, and it's just opening minds.
Yeah, and I think that's been the important part for us to come in with a level of humility too, because all of us have a truth that's based in an experience, whether that's a negative experience or a positive, and that's where the education piece comes in. And if we can present it in frameworks that is supported by data or create, openness to different perspectives that can drive different outcomes, I think that's where we get the traction. But I think one of the biggest incentives for getting broader adoption is being able to prove out profitability.
Yeah, every
farm, regardless of their ethos, ultimately has to answer to the profitability of the model. That's true sustainability, right?
Yeah.
Before we talk about any other sustainability.
And the other farmers, they look at that.
Exactly.
Oh, this farm has a new pickup. Oh my God, things are going well.
That's right.
It's as simple as that sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you give us a success example of particularly seeing a transition or a new farmer, but kind of out in, middle America, let's say, out in the big farming country where there's thousands of acres of corn, for instance, someone out there that's making that transition. And before you even answer that, could you also just very quickly say like the elevator pitch of what AEA does for farmers? Because I think we kind of say that. No, just so people understand what you guys do.
Yeah, the 10-cent tour, as it were, is essentially, we started in 2006 primarily as an agronomy consultancy company, which is still true today. We're still primarily a consultancy company. We pioneered this use of something called sap analysis, which is, I think some people are familiar with. It's like a blood test for the crop. And in part, some of that journey, then we realized that we were creating solutions. We were able to validate the reason why a farmer should do X, Y, Z. And then when they reached into their toolbox regarding fertility, we started to see very quickly a lot of stuff wasn't working. And fast forward to today, that's one of the big reasons that we have essentially a range of nutrient products, NOP, predominantly NOP certified, which is for the US, right? That organic certifiable, program. So then we have these offerings of consultancy as a standalone, or products as a standalone, or a hybrid where a farmer can work with us both on the agronomy and the products.
And the products are not fertilizers.
They're predominantly, in the sense that they are generally all organic. They're nutrient inputs for sure, but they're predominantly micronutrients. That's the big part of our range, as well as we carry a number of biological based products as well. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's bringing different kind of nutrients for different reasons to balance the soil.
Yeah.
And then that creates the fertility.
Exactly right. Yeah. Yeah.
And there's a backstory to John Kempf, and how that he explained. We heard him at Canopy. He gave a speech here, and his backstory of being on a farm, growing up, using all the pesticides and fertilizers imaginable, and then really having kind of an epiphany and moving on from that. And do you know why did he choose the regenerative word, so to say, to kind of hitch to and go forth with his podcast? The podcast is Regenerative Agriculture Podcast. Where did that come into play?
Yeah, I mean, for those that know John, right, he devours information. Certainly, not that too long ago, he was probably reading 6 books a week. And not including papers. Absolute, monster in terms of devouring and reading information. It was probably around 2011, and I think it would be fair to say John wasn't the only person considering or starting to use the terminology, but what he really thought of was around this idea that if we're using the language, let's say, of sustainability, there's a number of things on farms that are practices that shouldn't be sustained, and so that terminology doesn't necessarily cover what we were trying to say. And what we really mean by regenerative agriculture, why he started using that term, was around this idea that we are restoring, rebuilding, regenerating soils in a way where we coined the phrase, for example, like working with nature, not against it, right? When you can build out these ecosystems and see that they actually have a positive role to play, instead of this, I have to put out all these sprays and fight against nature just to grow one crop in one season and everything's against me. Is like, well, maybe there are tools right in front of us that are, helpful. And then John's taken that terminology further more recently to talk about the impact of how we do business, how we regenerate farmers' capacity to steward land, and the implications to the wider community. And that's obviously a key part of, the DNA of here for you guys too, right? The way it impacts the local community and so on and beyond that. So
it's top of mind for us.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. Our mojo is small scale farming is changing the world, but it's changing the world because it's changing all these communities.
Yeah.
And,
So do you have a success story out in the Midwest, perhaps?
Oh gosh. We have a lot of,
sure.
the team works across all the major ag areas, primarily in the domestic North America.
I would say from having listened to, I'm interrupting you.
Yes,
so sorry,
you're good.
But it's not just like farmland out in the Midwest. It's mostly farmers that were doing monocultures.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say you have an orchard.
Yeah.
When you have disease in an orchard and you have 50 acres,
Of the same tree.
It's a big problem to solve. And from the stories that I've heard from you guys, that's where you guys come in and solve a lot of these problems there.
Yeah, there's some very, taking the orchard route, which is kind of my passion. I have a love for affinity for orchards. My happy place, let's say. We have some large orchards out in the Pacific Northwest, and a lot of orchard folks that are listening to this as well understand that, for a number of those fruits, things like fire blight can be a significant disease that causes significant dieback. And then the management practice around that means that you have to send in a lot of people to prune it all out. 2 weeks worth of pruning, significantly obviously cutting back the production of those trees. So we came in with diagnosing, how we could address that through nutrition, utilizing sap analysis, and basically came up with a recipe to address that. And, we were able to not only prevent future fire blight, but also to get rid of it through nutrition. And the owner of that particular orchard didn't believe the orchard manager, that there was no fire blight in the scouting trips, and they had all of these, employees who were waiting to go to prune it all out, and 2 hours later he comes out the orchard and couldn't find it. And so we've been able to repeat that kind of success, and so which is why we ended up working on more and more of the thousands of acres that we're currently working on with that particular farm still to this day.
Orchards also, I've heard that you guys were working on. Yeah. So vegetables, but also all these other crops that are out there. Yeah,
if I remember the story straight, one of the working with cherries in Oregon, one of the breaks, we were actually at the time trying to fix tomato cracking, splitting in Pennsylvania, and addressing that through nutrition. And part of that was, let's try some of that approach on this issue with bacterial canker and working on cherries, which also can potentially have cracking and splitting issues. And it turned out that a lot of that translated to success on the cherry orchard, to where we can also, mitigate bacterial canker as an issue, which I'm not aware if, according to the extensions and the books, say that can be resolved as an issue, certainly not through nutrition. So it's quite controversial when you come into this. And part of our big problem, we've talked a little bit about this, that I try and navigate, is a lot of the big farms that we work on, we're under NDA. They don't want any of their neighbors to know what the secret source is. So they're not readily available from a marketing perspective to really validate what we're saying that sounds kind of out there to the average listener or the average farmer, right? So
I just love that you added that piece, because that's reality.
Yeah.
Like in the small farms, like our kind of farms, we're not really competing for markets, but on bigger farms, it's a different thing.
Yeah, not hiding secrets.
Yeah. Sure. So you don't want to have your neighbor perhaps copy and paste.
That's
interesting stuff.
Yeah. Different challenges.
Yeah.
It is interesting.
Yeah.
Let's dive into AEA then and start on sap analysis. Why should people care about this? Because obviously most growers, especially in our space, are very familiar with soil tests. And, we have this deep-seated belief that it really is all about the soil. But you kind of bring in this sap analysis, and it's a step up, it seems, and it goes even further than just looking at the soil. So why? Can you explain sap analysis and why it's really important?
Yeah. I mean, it's a tool, right? Like everything. I mean, there's certainly no silver bullet. Anybody in agriculture knows that there's no silver bullet for. It's probably the closest thing we have to cheating in our minds in terms of like what you get from the data. I think I'd put it a couple of ways. Number one, I think most growers, certainly from our experience, and maybe this is just from the large scale perspective, have seen enough soil tests in their history, and also have got really good at getting good balanced soils, and have still seen a disparity in the way the crop produces or appears, and the two don't line up. And I would say that that's primarily because, there's a missing piece there, right? There's the theory of, I've put all this food on the table, like at dinner time in my house, right? So we put all of these dinner plates out full of food. Now, how much will my kids actually eat? Right?
And that's a good analogy.
And that's kind of the same thing. In the soil test, we're saying, theoretically, here's all the food that's available for the plants to eat. But what did they actually eat? And that's what sap analysis tells us. It looks inside the cells of the plant themselves, looks at, to use technical terms, the xylem and phloem material, where nutrition flows physiologically through the plant, and it's measuring that and that alone. And so you really don't get the noise of whether the plant is storing, nutrition that it can't utilize, like nitrate, for example, that has very little use for in most crops. And it gives you an accurate understanding of what's it excessive in and what's it deficient in. And if you can use sap testing at what we call critical points of influence, times in the season where it makes most sense to be really dialed in to the nutrition because of, for example, a shift in tomatoes going from vegetative to reproductive to fruiting, right? And so that's why we use this kind of blood test analogy to say it's dialing in. And then what we've been able to help farmers with in utilizing that is in saying, well, when you typically, let's see, you have a visual problem that you see, for the most part, it's too late. Right? There's very little you can do, or let's put it another way, you will also experience a significant impact on production.
It's like human health too.
Exactly.
When you're already sick, you're too late to prevent it.
Yeah.
You can treat it perhaps, but you're treating your
symptoms.
Yeah. This is the great parallel, right? The plant health, human health piece, right? That there's so much kind of imagery there that overlaps.
Yeah.
And so in sap analysis, we would say you get about a 10 to 14 day window of a head start of seeing something in the plant sap before you see it visually. 10 to 14 days for a lot of farms, regardless of scale, is enough time to do something about it. And especially if it's a high value crop, let's say, where it's worth adding additional nutrients and for you to still be able to realize that ROI in the market, then that's really great data to have.
Yeah. I want to ask you if you can explain the kind of the magic of a foliar spray. And what I mean by the magic is that I think for a lot of people, because AEA is kind of big on foliar sprays. Yep. And when I think of a foliar spray, I tend to think of a topical medication on a human. And I think, that's the weakest of medication. It's the internal stuff that's the strongest. And that really makes a difference. But then I've learned from John Kempf that a foliar spray there's all kinds and different reasons, but man, it can be powerful stuff. Yep. What's the magic sauce there?
In the same way, intravenous medicine is quicker in getting into the system than vitamin pills that take a while to digest.
So the cream analogy is not the right analogy. Intravenous would be closer. Intravenous,
probably, yeah. Essentially, pretty much all plants have the ability to absorb nutrition through the leaf surfaces, through the stomata, and in some cases also to some degree, even bark and branches can absorb nutrition. Here's a good example, right? Most of our soils, or our crop production, we see deficiencies in calcium, even if it's there in the soil. We could go into
because it's not available,
right? Not available. Same would be true of iron and manganese. My wonderful Virginia red clay, right? I have all the iron there under the sun, but it's not available. If I want to make a calcium correction to the soil, let's say, and we should use that, and we should build that into our programs for the most part. Root uptake, it can be 30 plus days, let's say. Before, in other words, depending on the size of the let's say we use a lot of gypsum, right? Depending on the prill size, and whether how long it takes to break down. Let's say it takes 30 days for the plant to take it up. If I'm at a very critical stage of production, like in cell division, and I have a stated deficiency in my sap analysis, I probably missed the most important window if I need to wait another 30 days to realize that calcium uptake from the soil. Mm-hmm. So a foliar is that's my intravenous opportunity to adjust that calcium level along with some other pieces there to get the nutrition in.
I have a devil's advocate question. Not exactly devil's advocate, but if I'm thinking evolutionarily about plants, how would they get nutrition from foliar, like from their leaves, other than sun, if you know what I mean? Like, how does it exist in nature, that concept of taking in nutrition from, do you know? Is there
I definitely, John would be a better one to explain all the ins and outs, but you do essentially have these stomata that are open regardless. So for example, a lot of the atmosphere is nitrogen, right? So theoretically, if the plants can take that in, and they're going to take that in through their leaves, they're absorbing nitrogen, that process. And obviously there's photosynthesis involved and so all these other pieces as well. It's like, I would describe it maybe in the simplest way, which is like leaves are like the pores of our skin.
Yeah.
Right. They're good at keeping a lot of stuff out. Like if we swim in a pond, right, we don't get saturated with water and sink to the bottom. Yeah. But at the same time, we can absorb a lot of things through our dermis, and the same is for plants. Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to address something, which is this word products. And what I mean by that is that to a lot of the small scale gardening community, I think they have kind of an aversion to this idea of a product, something in a white bottle with a name and a bunch of words on it, because it feels very close in their mind to a chemical input. I think, the transitioning grower and the larger scale grower is very comfortable with this probably. But how do you speak to that person that just kind of they want to use things that are more or less raw materials. They like the thought of just using a rock dust or using chicken manure, but a product with, some of the names of the products, they're like, oh, what's that?
Production.
Yeah.
To me, it's a cultural thing. It's a way of just how people view things. But how do you, because I think what you have to offer are amazing products.
Yeah.
But there's that kind of romantic rebel small scale grower that's like a product. I don't want products.
Yeah.
How do you kind of talk to them? Do you see what I'm going?
There's a lot in there.
I know. I'm just curious because I think
that's what happens when you hang out with small scale growers.
I think there's a lot of value though, and that they could be gaining if maybe we could break down that barrier of, because I'm even one of these people. I see the way the product looks, and my mind just goes to like, oh, that's not what I'm into.
Yeah.
But in reality, there's nothing wrong with it.
No, like, look, I think healthily so, right? Like if you're investing into production of food for a community, regardless of how big it is, part of your ethos is, when you really care, is you want everything to be natural, quote unquote.
Yeah, quote unquote.
Right. And so a lot of the products that people are more comfortable with using is because they have an idea that at least it's quote unquote natural, right? Although we could have a whole other conversation about how even, some disease controlling materials, let's say, are also natural.
Yeah.
Copper, for example, right?
Exactly. And toxic.
and toxic. Right. And you can get into trouble with natural inputs like compost 100%. Too, and others as well. I think, interestingly enough, there's a level of criticism that's right. And it also has impacted large-scale producers, in the sense of large-scale producers get hit up unbelievably by fertilizer companies trying to sell them something. Right. And the old model was that I would love to see an end to, and hopefully our work, even together, would begin to see an end to that, which is the idea that just buy these products off me. Trust me, you don't need to know how it works. I'll figure out all of the application rates. Here's your program, and I'll take my commission bonus check. And
that farming is nothing more than a purchase of products applied to the ground, and voila.
Yeah, and you're an operation manager.
Yeah. And you can argue, you could even argue that a soil testing is essentially at this point an extension of a sales, fertilizer sales tool, right? Yeah. When you look at now the data that we get from SAP analysis, right? Anyway, that's perhaps a bunny trap.
But I like that because it's kind of right in a way.
Yeah.
That's how the last 50 years have been.
Exactly.
All the research that's been done in agronomy
was, and that's why there's such the aversion, because people are rebelling against that. They're rebelling against
SAP,
the way.
That brings it to a new level. And I've seen some of these SAP analysis that you guys do. They're quite sophisticated.
Yeah.
And you do need to have some consulting or some high-level background to understand what's going on. And through the phase of the plant, it's also changing. So it's not like this static recipe that you just throw into the ground. It's a...
Exactly. Yeah. No, exactly right. So this idea of products, so I think for the, I only want to use something natural, right?
Yeah.
That camp, I understand it. We understand it really well. And I think we're all aligned that ultimately we don't want to be putting things into the ground in our crop production that, isn't, right? Let's be really clear. We have the ability to move away. We can grow at any scale without needing those. And a lot of those synthetic products, look, we already know they're very biologically suppressive. So there's a great case for being natural. But to address the natural camp, let's call them, right? If you get into the data, I think what you'll find is that there's a gap between understanding even what natural inputs are truly able to do, or let's put it another way, right? A judicious use, an informed use of natural products is where we can take that conversation. And we like the idea of at AEA, I'm really passionate about this, hence why one of the reasons why I work at AEA is, can we create a timeline where you need less and less of anything, including, let's say, AEA products?
Yeah.
Right? They serve as a purpose, and depending on the goal of a farmer, maybe that's a temporary purpose, right? We have growers that want to, for example, close the fertility loop. They want to build out a natural ecosystem where there is no need for any kind of input, whether it's control or fertility.
And that's
whatever.
a massive dream of many a small-scale grower, especially.
Exactly. And I'll say it takes a lot of work to be able to do that. And it won't come cheap initially. So it needs to be a long-term plan. It needs to be a long-term strategy. So that can be a goal. What's interesting in a lot of our experience with those growers that also have had that passion to close the fertility loop, often they get really close or close enough to it, and then they start dreaming about, but what's genetically potential from this crop? Now that I've got health all figured out, what if I could make 3 times the amount of yield, in the same? And so then they're back into the cook's kitchen again.
And with only it, because also I just wanted to say, like, just because it's in a white bottle doesn't mean it's not all natural.
Correct.
Oh no,
because the components are. Everyone knows the naturalistic fallacy. Like it is a fallacy because of the fact it can be so easily misconstrued to be synonymous with health, but it doesn't automatically mean that a natural poison is a poison. So anyway.
When you look at removing some of the biggest limiting factors, even regardless of where you are, whether you're permaculture, organic and so on, or even conventional, some of the biggest limiting factors are. There's a reason why our product range revolves around the micronutrients, because generally speaking, once you figure out how to stop putting out excessive nitrogen or phosphorus or potassium, the NPK cycle of life, right? Most of the other physiological things that we're going to do the most impact crop performance and crop health and crop immunity to diseases and pests are all these little tiny amounts and little applications here and there of micronutrients like cobalt or molybdenum, right? Or stuff we don't even know how to spell or pronounce, right? But they often can be the key linchpin, as it were, to seeing a crop that performs okay on natural inputs that are, whether it's feather meal, bone meal, whatever, all these other potential inputs as well, can be the linchpin to really drive crop performance and health to the next level.
This podcast is proudly supported by Tessier Greenhouses. Tessier has always been one of my top choices for greenhouses and tunnels. For over 45 years, they've been manufacturing high quality and incredibly strong structures right here in North America. Their products can withstand the heavy snow loads we faced here in the Northeast, and their prices are among the best in the market. Tessier offers excellent service and expertise, always ready to help with customized solutions. I particularly appreciate their commitment to innovation and their willingness to listen to the needs of growers. At the Old Mill, we use several of their Gothic Caterpillar tunnels and micro tunnel for season extension, and I'm always impressed with their design and build quality. Without companies like Tessier, food sovereignty just wouldn't be possible. So thank you, Tessier, for helping us growers feed our community year-round. You guys rock.
Use promo code MGI10 for 10% off your first order and free shipping in select regions.
One of those aspects that you talk a lot about is photosynthetic ability.
Yep.
This is fascinating for anyone that's ever listened to John Kempf talk about it, for instance, because I think he said something that, you find that a lot of growers are only at 20%.
15 to 20% in the US is about the average.
And what if they were at 60, Can you elaborate a bit on that? And like, why is that? Should a market gardener, for instance, be thinking a lot about photosynthetic ability of their plants?
Yes.
And how should they think about it?
So a couple of things, right? Increasing photosynthesis. So, well, let me back up. One of the things that John designed, I think, is really helpful. It's a free resource on the website, is this thing called the Plant Health Pyramid.
Want me to put it up?
Yeah, sure. We can take a look at that. So if you go to resources, grower tools. Yeah. So basically what we're looking at, right, is 4 stages of plant health that are broken into 2 categories, passive immunity and active immunity. The most important thing around those 2 pieces is that the first 2 levels of plant health are all to do with balancing the nutritional profile of a crop. In other words, balance chemistry within the crop. The higher levels, the level 3 and 4, are all based on having robust microbiology in the soil profile. Okay.
Do you need to have the lower levels in order to have the higher levels? Like, are they sort of prerequisites or is there some?
You can, I would put it this way, you can address both at the same time, right? You can be building both at the same time. It's not like I'm working my way up a level like in a 80s, arcade game, big boss at the top, right? So photosynthesis, let me back up again. So what we're describing here is what can a grower expect to see when they accomplish or improve these particular functions? So for example, if you scroll down to the second page on this section of photosynthesis, when we focus on increasing the plant's ability to photosynthesize more efficiently, then plants begin to develop a resistance to all airborne pathogens like Pythium, Rhizoctonia, and so on, okay? So already we know, especially in the market garden world and the conventional agricultural world, where we try to do this thing called sterilizing the bed, hoping that we'll never see pathogens show up in the soil. We've got these other ones to deal with in the air, right? So we're always going to have these potential fungal spores or pathogens, etc., that can be showing up. So there's an invested reason, especially if you then don't want to use fungicides, right, to be building out the solution from within the plant, and that is by increasing its ability to photosynthesize. So that's benefit number one. Benefit number two is, let's say we do move photosynthesis up to about 60%, right? 100% means we have to be a demigod and control the weather and all of this kind of, sort of situation. But let's say we get it to 60%. Then 60% means we have a massive shift within the plant between where it's sending sugars or exudate. So we're going to start to see a lot more going back into our soil, which means we're now creating more good biology food. We're also going to see a larger root mass, which means we're going to be able to increase the amount of energy, right, delivered into our finished crop. We're going to see a split between the carbohydrates. We're going to see an increased yield. And then finally, we're going to see around 5 times the amount of carbon being cycled every 24 hours.
Wow.
So in terms of long-term strategy and short-term strategy and profitability, we have 3, if not 4, really great reasons to focus even just on improving photosynthesis.
And what's like a typical mechanism for that to occur? For let's just say I'm a small scale grower. I'm like, okay, I want to increase my photosynthesis. How do I do that? I mean, I realize it might be pretty complicated, but could you give an example of at least one kind of thing that's maybe frequently done or you see often?
So anybody should be able to at least afford one sap. Okay. Right. So we take a sap analysis. We're going to look at the primary nutrients that are responsible for photosynthesis. So on one hand, so in chlorophyll, right, we have magnesium in the center. We have some nitrogen, and then we've got iron and phosphorus and manganese also playing in a role overall in increasing photosynthesis. So getting those nutrient levels right, i.e. bringing down excesses or increasing where there's deficiencies, is that nutrient-based approach to increasing the ability for more photosynthesis.
And that can be both soil and foliar.
Yep.
Foliar done.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. And a lot of those, like, especially for things like iron and the role that iron will play, probably better as a foliar, right? If you have oxidized iron in the soil, we know that that's, going back to my Virginia red clay, right? I can't access it because it's oxidized, right? So if you're at the risk where you have a highly oxidized soil, an iron application is going to be potentially tricky for the crop to receive. So that's where foliars can, again, intravenously bypass that issue of it being locked up in the soil.
And I imagine they're also just quicker acting.
Exactly.
Maybe you could fix that in the soil over time, but at least in the moment you can apply foliar and it's more...
You absolutely want to fix it long-term in the soil. Yeah, I mean, that's, again, part of the profitability.
John, when he came at the Canopy program, he really talked also about the roots playing such a big part in building that soil ecology, which is really the first time that I was kind of hearing that.
Yeah, and living plant material in the ground as opposed to...
A substract, like you buy peat moss for your seedlings, there's no roots in it. So it's, even if you fill it with all these bioactive stimulants later, it doesn't have the root system.
Yeah.
What role does the roots afterwards play to colonize? And can you talk about that?
Yeah. So That's a great case for working in soil, right? I mean, yes, you can do things in substrate or hydroponics and all the other various systems out there. But if you really want long-term profitability and want to be part of regenerating, right, we've got to be working in the soil. That's number one. Number two to that question is this thing called exudates, these sugars or carbohydrates that are being released through the root system when there's enough energy for more and more energy to come through the roots. That's essentially in the same way we feed our goldfish with those little sprinkles. We're providing food to the biology in the soil profile. So then what we're doing is we're stimulating this symbiotic synergistic relationship where the plant is feeding the biology, and then the biology in turns is repaying the favor and paying the crop back by sourcing its available nutrients in a much more friendly, energy efficient way back to the crop. And we have all kinds of species out there, including these endophytic species that are actually penetrating the root system itself and driving nutrition back into the plant, back into the root system. So it's not even all about just stuff coming out of the root. There's these other species coming back in literally directly, as if we would tap a phone line or something like that. Yeah.
Is there any research being done on that? Or is it like,
lots.
Lots?
Yeah.
Okay.
Lots. And I think even a basic search on YouTube and other places, you'll even see videos of that in action under a microscope. So we have a lot of data, and obviously it's a huge topic, and there's a gazillion at least species in the soil that we're still beginning to understand. But from what we're learning, right, it's such a critical role, this place of biology in the soil for what we want to do.
Can you tell us a bit about seed inoculants and how they can lead to the Bob Marley roots that I've seen talked about by John?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Because I think, I remember at my farm, we were using a seed inoculant, many, many years ago. So I guess a lot of growers are aware of this and maybe they're practicing it, but does AEA bring something special to the table in regards to that? And is there more information that we now understand about why that's so useful and can be effective? And again, I'll bring it back to the market gardener listening.
Yeah.
Why should they use a seed inoculant, or should they?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it goes back to even perhaps arguing whether one should buy really high quality compost or make your own. If you're hoping to consistently provide the right biological profile in your compost, I mean, great if you have the time, the resources, the energy to do it. But if somebody's done the work for you, then perhaps that's even better. Perhaps that makes more sense in your model from a time restraint or an economical perspective, right? And so the same is true of seed inoculants, right? We know over time, and even early, more indigenous, groups of people, even here in North America, knew this too in a different way, that seed genetics starts to decline because the biology associated to that constantly, saving seed and growing again begins to decline. We also know that obviously depending on the land we've inherited and the conditions we started from, or where we've been able to take soil improvement, soil health improvement to, some of those missing pieces may be best solved by inoculants being added in. Our approach is generally that we try to provide a broad spectrum of species, including keystone species that can have, again, synergistic and symbiotic relationships with more specific species. But even the large, more conventional companies now are carrying, for the most part, specific strains of inoculant for their seed treatment. So it's become a very well-known, way of helping that early germination period and supporting seed quality, which is a whole other conversation in itself, right? The decline of the nutrient profile of seeds in general. So,
can you tell us about the temperature in the soil and the importance of that? Something that John Kempf had brought up in his presentation here that really made me think was when he spoke about just the temperature of the soil and how big of an impact it had, and how a lot of growers, just by leaving it a little bit bare on a hot day, or not destroying it, but really weakening it. And I was like, oh wow, I don't think a lot of growers are necessarily thinking that deep into that. You know, they understand soil covered, yes, but we also, depending on where you live, you know, here it's really wet. There's slug issues, so a lot of growers are you know, leaving more soil bare more often because the trade-off of what they sometimes experience when they overcover it is actually worse. Can you just expand upon that?
Yeah, I mean, so the general temperature is probably somewhere around 102, 100, 102, 104, where essentially all biology is scorched earth in the first couple of inches. So, you know, if you're hoping, depending on the kind of crop then you're growing, the depth of typically where its root systems are, if you're banking on, let's say, you know, 2 to 4 inches, well, you've just decimated half of that biological population, let's say in the first 2, and then you're now relying maybe on 3 and 4, maybe also depending on the period of time and of the soil drying out, its overall temperature, maybe that impact of temperature has already done its job down to killing out biology significantly at that level too. So there's a case essentially for, yes, how, number one, how you're managing water, number two, that the overall soil temperature, in the same way that we're looking at leaf surface temperature, right, to be able to understand whether there's transpiration effectively happening or whether we can increase the period of photosynthesis and all of those kinds of pieces. So temperature in general is absolutely key, and especially in areas where we're seeing more variability and inconsistencies of, you know, drought extremes and temperature extremes. So that can have a huge plot. And again, if you come back to this idea that we're trying to build biology, you know, to have maximum support for the crop that's bringing us profitability, then that can be a serious issue for sure.
Are a lot of growers, though, missing out a lot on something because they're letting their soil get scorched, you think?
I think so. I think especially for, you know, if we go into a broadacre context, right? You know, where that's going to be more challenging, you know, and we need to start looking at ways to incentivize the use of cover crops that can start to manage that ambient surface temperature.
Direct seeding into them. And all.
Exactly. I mean, you know, let's say it gave you a 30-40% bump. I mean, for the ROI of an inoculant, which is, you know, generally speaking, one of the cheapest, you know, inputs, albeit biological, that a farmer can make. I mean, the math is just, it makes sense. So, yeah.
It's such a small quantity of it compared to other things.
Exactly. A little goes a long way. Yeah.
When we're in the market gardens, there's a lot of tools that are actually there to avoid that, you know, because we're flipping soil 3, 4, 5 times.
And keeping it covered so much with canopies.
You know, just like these insect nets, just covering the bed, like bringing it to something really different from what you guys are talking about right now. But just like covering the bed with an insect net, white. Once you're flipping the bed, the beds are open for 1-2 weeks. You just leave it covered, and that's something that we've been teaching a lot. It's like never leave it.
Yeah,
especially as of June, from June here to September, like you can feel it.
Yeah,
you can feel it. That if you leave it for a few weeks, kind of bare, it just doesn't have the same afterwards.
Yeah, and it makes total sense, right? You know, and production context is, I'm glad you bring that in, because the context of how we grow is super important.
Yeah, the mechanics.
And in that, you know, consistent perpetual bed flipping, even if we're doing 2 steps forward, 1 step back, that still makes sense, because that's still moving long term the soils to a healthier and healthier thing. And it's those little pieces that we can do.
Yeah.
What does it take extra time to do that?
The nets are there, like you just leave them. Yeah. When we look at the pyramid, like there's one thing when you go at the top of it.
Yeah,
that's what we heard John say at the canopy retreat that we were having here, and he said that in a way that was kind of like, this is 100% sure bet. And I was like sitting there, I was like, "Ooh, that's kind of deep stuff."
Yeah,
we can resolve all the plants' problem.
It's a bold statement, right?
It's pretty bold.
Yeah,
and he stuck with it, and I didn't challenge him.
Yeah,
that wasn't my game, but I was just kind of like, wow.
Some people were
Yeah, I was.
Yeah.
I was blown away by that.
Yeah.
And do you think that that's also the case? Do you believe that?
Yeah, I think it's also when it comes down to practical, right? It's also an aspirational journey as opposed to this kind of like definitive. I'm going to always, in whatever context and whatever crops I'm going to reach that. And so I take me for example, right? My love for orchards. I have an orchard in Virginia. It's about year 5 or year 6. The last 3 years, I've been doing my own experiment regarding how high I can get my orchards up on the plant health pyramid. In my area, I get a lot of pressure from Japanese beetle. Very destructive, right? Very quickly defoliates the whole tree, right? So now I with the protocols and insights with sap analysis, I've had 3 years running straight now. Well, 2, discounting the first year, where I'm immune to Japanese beetles. In 3 years.
That's pretty impressive.
That's not bad, is it?
No, no, it's amazing.
So we talk about, I think, things that just seem always out of the realm of possibility, or that sounds like a sales term or too bold or too, controversial, etc.
No.
But when it comes down to the practicality, if that's my direction, and let's say I want to prove him wrong, that's still a great motivation, right? Because if I take these things, prove us wrong, go for it, move, see how far you can get down the line.
Yeah.
Because 3 years running,
it's like, and when I heard that, I wasn't in the camp of, that's certainly not true. It's like, I was just like kind of opened my mind. It's like, whoa,
yeah, could that be possible?
Could that be possible? And what if that solves a lot of our problems in the gardens? Like, oh my God, like we spend a lot of time scouting for disease. We spend a lot of time mitigating disease. Pests are a big. And, it just kind of opened, like we've spent in market gardening so much time figuring out, because we were growing 40 to 60 different crops, there's all these different strategies at different moments, at different times. It's a lot of complexity. And I was like, whoa, imagine if we can simplify that and then have less of that work done afterwards. And it just kind of.
Yeah. I think, when we interact with nature in a very specific way, right? In the terms of the types of crops that we're growing, the types of production that we do. But so a lot of farmers have seen this, where they step back and they look at, let's say their 30-acre field of broadacre crops, and around the edges of their field, they've got, forest and other kind of species that's not getting any kind of the pressure that they're experiencing on their crop production. And so there's also this indicator for me when I see that and think about that, I'm saying, like, that's also an indicator of what's possible, because something is going on and we lose sight of this because we're so tied to the inconsistency of performance year after year, and the struggles, the very real struggles that we face as growers, where we have all of these challenges. To step back and see something it's right there on our property that's not experiencing the same kind of problems. You're either going to be frustrated and even more mad about the job, or curious. Yeah. And that's the change in mindset, right? That I think being open to that and being curious to say, well, so what's going on there? How do I get what I'm doing to be somewhat similar or exactly the same as what's going on?
I think one of the key is canopy.
Yeah.
Having the soil somehow protected.
Yeah.
I think, forest systems, that's what really protects them so much.
Yeah, you've got to look after all of everything understory in the soil. Yeah. Yeah.
I want to ask something. I'm sure there's a listener that's thinking this right now, and they have this confusion, and I've had it before too. It starts with the idea that a lot of people, especially in the market garden organic world, say something along the lines of, I want to eat kale with insect holes in it, because if the insects like it, then it must be healthy and good for me. However, according to John Kempf and AEA, there's this concept that if your plant is at its absolute healthiest, an insect won't even want it. And yet I guess what I'm saying is, some people might think, but I don't get it. If it's healthy for me, why would the insect not want it? And I think it might connect to a quote from William Albrecht.
Okay. Yeah.
Do you see where I'm going with this? That insects are nature's garbage collectors and diseases are her cleanup crew.
Yeah.
What do you think? Like, what do you tell that person that's having this confusion?
Yeah. Oh man,
is Albrecht the answer? Because he kind of, in my mind, he almost answers it there that insects are they're not you. Like they don't need the same thing that you need nutritionally.
Yeah.
And if you imagine that the universe, all biology kind of has a purpose in interplay with all of each other, perhaps they do have this role of it's the garbage that they're eating, not the best stuff. The best stuff is I don't know where I sit.
No, I like what you're.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. And
I'll start with the solution. I think the solution actually, especially for farmers who don't want holes in the stuff they're growing, right, just to be able to sell it, right? The solution is having the ability to sell something in the market that is proven to be nutrient dense. That's still ultimately what at the heart of our consumers are the people that purchase what we grow want, right? And because nutrient density also correlates to that plant immunity, again, right, there's that win-win scenario. Maybe I'll say my own controversial statement, which is in 2025, I don't think anybody should be wrestling with aphid pressure. It's that easy to solve. So let's look at it from the plant health pyramid, right? So level number 2 here, protein synthesis. Essentially for all of the simple digestive insects that we would see in production, for the most part, what are they feeding on? They're feeding on nitrogen and ammonia that hasn't been converted into a protein, which happens in this process of protein synthesis.
Can I just pause a quick?
Yeah.
Are you basically about to answer why insects won't eat the truly healthy crop and why they don't even want to and why it's different from our digestion? Okay, good.
Exactly. So when we have all of those simple sources of nitrogen, nitrate and ammonia, right, in the leaf, hasn't been converted into a protein. Hasn't been converted into a protein. That's essentially, in layman's terms, a food source for those insects. So if we expedite in the 24-hour cycle that conversion rapidly into a complex protein, we've simply taken what was a food source and made it not a food source anymore. And if you really wanted to have fun, you can do this. We've done this before. You can apply all of those nutrients that are responsible for increasing protein synthesis when you have aphids, spider pressure, whatever, anything with that simple digestive system, while they're eating on your crop. And we've seen it time and time again, 24 hours later, they're dead below your crop and they all died of indigestion.
Whoa. Running a farm takes so much more than just growing food. There's the website, the email, the billing, the customer questions. And if you're like me, you're probably feeling the weight of it all. That's why I want to tell you about Farmhand. Farmhand is an all-in-one virtual assistant built for CSA farmers. It handles the back office, things like website, newsletters, weekly add-ons, flyers, QR code, member support, even billing, so you can focus on what matters, the farm and your community. So if you're in the thick of the season and feeling stretched, or maybe your signups didn't quite go as planned, take a moment to explore Farmhand. Through this podcast, Farmhand is generously offering a one-on-one strategy session for any one of you out there that might need their help. Check out farmhand.partners/podcast to book that session with them. It's totally worth it, guys. Check them out.
24 hours.
Because you're taking something that can be converted that rapidly from a food source to a non-food source. So that's one of the reasons why I'm saying, why should we be struggling with this kind of pressure? Now, maybe economically for the crop or the life cycle, the days to maturity of that crop, netting it makes the most sense. What do you think, Jay?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think netting is because
it's easier.
It's easier and it doesn't always work too.
That's a good point.
That's the thing, right? With aphids especially.
Yeah, it's not 100% blocking a way in.
Yeah. There's bigger insects that would, obviously can't penetrate, but aphids. But what I'm hearing now is like you have aphids, and then what's the reason why they're eating the spinach plant is because the spinach is not because I'm not good with all these chemical words.
Right.
These chemistry words.
Sure.
Okay. these biology words. And so the plant has extra of something that's not converting. And so these are coming in to eat that, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And then if you balance that in the plant, they have nothing to eat and they just kind of fold away.
Yeah.
Or they wouldn't come in the first place.
So on the other flip side, right? So there's also signatures in the infrared spectrum. So like nitrate, ammonia can give off a signature that is visually what the insects sees.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So if you remember the old 50s diners, American diners that had the neon flashing light that says "Come dine here," right? That's essentially what is happening in the world of the insects, quote unquote, vision, right, from the infrared spectrum. So when you change those signatures to be converted, those nitrate ammoniums into proteins, right? You've essentially also turned the light switch off.
You're turning on the no vacancy sign.
Exactly. And depending on whether you like your neighbors a lot, you can move along, nothing to see here, go visit somebody's crop who they can see, so.
Wow. That's fascinating.
So we see that, now and then in really spectacular ways, right? Farms, for example, going back to berries in the Pacific Northwest, where spotted wing drusilla is an issue, where at one farm using the protocol, all of his other neighbors are growing the same crop, have the same challenges. The neighbors' crops get decimated, but they can't see this guy's crop. So they just keep going.
What have you done at your orchard? I imagine you have the typical things like plum curculio and whatnot that are challenges. I don't know, but obviously Japanese beetle. But what have you done in particular?
Yeah, some of the applications that you've made, like
strategies you've used.
My biggest challenge actually with plums was hail damage. That set that back quite significantly a couple of years ago.
Do you have a product for that?
There's definitely things you can do to help expedite the restoration of cells and recovery and stuff. And we've even seen that on vegetable crop stuff that's been, you look firsthand, it looks like my crop's toast. And we've seen crops come back with foliars after hail damage.
There's also ways to delay the harvest, isn't there?
Yep.
And could that actually, if you know, well, I guess by the time you know hail's coming, perhaps it's too late. But I was just imagining, what if you could make the fruit less ripe so it's a bit less vulnerable perhaps to the bruising, or I don't know. Is there anything?
Well, so bruising I would tackle more on the strength of the cell wall.
Yeah, okay.
So, calcium, copper, zinc, these kinds of pieces here that could strengthen the cell wall and really be, I would say even more than that, a lot of the mistakes is happening is over nitrogen use, which creates thin, weak cells. So again, another realization to get nitrogen right. And maybe for this audience too, I think when we talk about the wrong use of nitrogen, we just think immediately, synthetics and a lot of something or high nitrogen levels. You can get nitrogen management wrong when you're doing next to no inputs because you don't have an understanding even of what's going on regarding the oxidized state of your soil, where a lot of the nitrogen sitting in the soil is in the nitrate form. So as soon as you put a seed in the ground, there's already a high nitrate, environment for that seed. So nitrogen efficiency and nitrogen management also isn't just about the kinds of inputs that you're moving. It's understanding what's going on and what kinds of ways the crops are utilizing the nitrogen that you have available.
And that's where the sap analysis, the plant is telling you what's going on.
Yeah. You got to test, can't guess, and trying to figure this out for growers to make sure it can be economically viable, to give them the information. And this comes back to my desire to see the model change where we as agronomists are selling products that, I believe have their place and are necessary. Otherwise, I wouldn't be a part of a company did that, where the model means I actually want to give you, if you want to know, the education to understand why together we're going to make this application.
Yeah.
This isn't like, blindly trust the fertilizer guy. It's like, let me give you power as a farmer to make your own decisions to the point where along the way, you may not need our agronomy anymore. That's a win. There's plenty of work to do for us. Yeah. There's a lot of things to fix. And if you've got it figured out for your farm and you're doing all of these great things, great. And we're here to celebrate you. That's my vision. Yeah.
What do you think the level of kind of knowledge and learning that comes with like a grower becoming familiar with all these terms and with this understanding of how this works and functions, and perhaps with the help of AEA. But it's probably a lot of learning and that goes in through that.
Yeah, and I think it can sound daunting, especially when we start to use.
Or excited.
We're
very excited.
Again, depending on open and curious, whether suspicious or cynical, and all of the gray area in between that. Yeah, it can be. But I think one of the reasons why we have really smart people figuring out all of the mechanics down to the minutia detail means hopefully that if we're going to present solutions, have them do all the hard work and give you a distilled down version that actually can work practically, where you don't have to be a microscope expert or you have a PhD in physiology and immunity to even begin to start to do things.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I like using this toolbox analogy of like, learn some of these tools, learn why we're here as resources. This is part of why we love Canopy, right? And the work that you're doing with the Market Gardener Institute, because it's all about that educational empowerment.
Yeah.
So, I don't think it's as complicated as perhaps it seems.
Could you walk us down 2 paths? Basically, it's the paths of how someone could work with you, with AEA. I want to go, one is kind of the more really small market gardener, also a bit on the more romantic side, maybe has interest in creating their own fertility. They're not as interested, let's say, in going all in on products and whatnot, but you can still help them, sure. So there's that person. And then also super serious market gardener, ready to dive in all the way, do anything that you have to recommend. Kind of how do you navigate those 2 paths, would you say? What would it look like for that grower to work with you?
Yeah, for us, as a company, right, I would say we've got to figure out how to align to what's important for you. Right? Context is king. Obviously, we all know that. But also, even with SAP analysis, let's say, we have so many different ways to utilize that. Whether that's we want to better understand what's going on physiologically with one specific crop or a couple of crops, or whether we're trying to understand why certain blocks on my farm perform less well than other areas, or whether I want to take my best performing blocks and then push it into that genetic potential unknown, that utopia where, I'm 5xing my production. So there's all these different ways. So I think it depends, let's agree on what you want and what you see as most valuable. Then we can either say, hey, look, this sounds like, putting some general recommendations together, focusing some fertility in these particular areas can make a lot of sense. And that can be a relatively low economic lift, for everybody involved. And we can find ways from our time management perspective to make sure that's a resource available. On the other hand, for those that wanting to jump right in, we can do, like I said at the beginning, agronomy with products. A lot of times, when it makes economic sense for the farm, we would do the consultancy and offset a lot of that agronomy cost with products. It saves us time to use our own products because we know dialed in application rate based on the SAP analysis that we see, etc. And then the third option is if you're listening and you're standing, back with your arms folded with a level of cynicism, I would just say, do SAP analysis for a year without talking to us. Come back at the beginning of the next season and give us all of this data and say, what do you make of all of this?
Yeah.
Right? And let's have a conversation. And again, come back. As long as we're aligning on our values and our goals and providing value, then there's a conversation to be had.
Yeah, for sure. And then there's a proof in the pudding, which is the SAP analysis.
Yeah.
Like, it might be a good time to share this with the audience, is that we are, we're going to do a collaboration between Advancing Eco-Agriculture and the Market Gardener Institute to figure out what's the best practice for small-scale market gardeners that are growing all these different crops, short-cycle crops, repeating them, figuring out what would be like perhaps exactly that.
Exactly.
And then the fact that, you guys, if there's 500 1-acre farms that calls you tomorrow, it's going to be a lot to manage also.
Yeah.
Because, it's...
Yeah.
That's always the problem with our group, is that it's our advantage. We're there, we're versatile, we're out there, but we're not big.
Yeah.
And so we've been having these conversations together, and then I think we've signed the agreement.
That's right. We're super excited. Super pumped that we're kicking this off. And absolutely right. The resources that you've put into making these small farms work, the knowledge that you guys have and what we can bring to the table. I think always, right, if you can do it through partnerships and collaborations where you can find people that have the same DNA and value system and collaborate and complement each other, that's where we get traction. We said this before, there's so much work to be done.
Oh, it's incredible.
You know what I mean? And like we would have a hard time if all of those growers called us at the same time. So that, going into that partnership, figuring out how we can create very customized solutions for a wide range of those within the MGI network and going through the canopy training courses.
We have a lot of growers in our network that are going to be really stoked to participate. And we'll be doing is opening trials and trying to figure out troubleshooting some of the most pest problems, aphid probably being one of them, and then trying to map out what are the most current problems for most growers at that same time, trying to find patterns where there could be some interventions being done at that time, just trying to, a bit like scouting, like this is the general problem around that time, according to all these growers and the research that we're doing with you guys, this is what you could be doing. And so I'm really excited about this partnership. Like, this is something that has renewed my interest in soil ecology. Not that it had faded away, but I was kind of turned off by that no-till movement. Mm-hmm. It got me so turned off because everyone was talking about soil ecology just in terms of not tilling. And I was like, oh man, that's not
simplifying.
Really being dogmatic and not being really providing any insights, in my opinion. For me, at least. But when I listened to John the first time, and then I started to research and digging into what you guys were doing, I was like, okay, this is the next level. This is the next frontier. I really believe that.
We're super excited.
It
is exciting. How did you get into farming, Kish?
Oh man, the abridged story. For the sake of time, the restaurant will open any minute here.
I like this. I have a long story too. I'm sure many people do. So tell it away.
So I had a background, let's say, dabbling in holistic orchard management. And actually, one of the key people that influenced me there at the time was the late Michael Phillips.
And we were speaking about him. A lot of people
would know. He had a significant impact. I've been at his orchard and all of that kind of stuff. The long story short, for me, like a lot of farmers, they couldn't figure out how to make that work profitability wise and job wise to be full time for income. And I had a growing family, got 3 boys, now 14, 12, and 10. At a time, it just couldn't make it work. One of the things that happened, to pay the bills, I went into SaaS technology. My bills got pretty serious when our eldest son contracted what is called JIA, which is an unknown origin juvenile arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis. The leading expert said it's most likely environmentally caused. So when my son, around the age of 4, as a consequence of this arthritis, lost his ability to walk, we got really, really serious about controlling what we could, including the way the access to food and the way food was grown, and taking that back into control. So, coming back into considering the world of ag, I was in this tech job, was able to pay off a lot of the significant hospital bills that my son was getting. But, all of a sudden, Michael's talking about AEA products and he'd started to work with AEA as well for the agronomy consultancy, etc. And so I started to find out about who this John Kempf guy is and what are AEA up to. I started buying some of their products. And then one day I saw a job opening that was unrelated to agronomy, but I was like, I'd love to be an agronomist on the team there. I'm just going to go for the job and get my foot in the door in the company, and then maybe I can make a lateral move. And so fast forward, that's essentially what happened. I didn't get the job after a long interview process that I wanted, but they actually offered me an agronomy job. And so that's where I started within the company. And a linchpin to all of that was this idea of where my son's health was at and what contributes to, his autoimmune condition negatively and then positively. And then the more I learned about how we were doing things within AEA and the solutions we were providing, I wanted to take that to, my farm and our vegetable garden, our orchard and all of this kind of thing. And then you go, well, how can I not share this stuff? It's like somewhat like having the cure to cancer is like, who are you to keep it to yourself?
It really feels like magic.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like just some of the things that John has explained. I'm like, wow, that sounds like magic.
Yeah.
Like what the result.
Yeah.
So I agree. Yeah. How could you not want to?
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. Farming can be really complicated as the root causes of issues can be, several factors, not just one thing that you're addressing. Right. So it's I don't want to give the picture that it's not hard work, but it's hard work that can also be fun with what we do. We do have fun creating these kinds of solutions. Right. So the interesting thing with Michael was just before he passed, I ended up being his consultant.
Wow.
So I started to consult on his orchard as well. And it was, I was literally waiting on a response from him by email when I realized that, something else was going on when he wasn't responding and found out he'd passed away in his orchard.
Yeah, that was big news when that happened.
Yeah. He was, what I loved about him as well, he was such a bridge for, the permaculture community that would be very much into that. No inputs. We want to do things naturally. And maybe even sap analysis sounded like you were starting to align with the man, it's like something great like that. But he was a great, bridge for those, as well as bringing in like in a really user-friendly way, the work we were doing together at AEA to improve his orchard, and presenting that back to the wider community. So that was really great.
How long ago was that transition in your personal and professional life happened?
So my son, he like 4. So 10 years ago is when he got really sick. He had about 6 years of remission, and then he finally started to get some breakthroughs. And I've been at AEA 4 years now, just coming up. So yeah, it's been a wild and wacky ride, but he's doing better, and my orchard's doing great. I'm proud of that. So now to work on the vegetable garden.
Come on.
I must say that before we were outside chatting before we went on air, and we were talking about each of our orchards, and I just, in passing, nonchalantly mentioned Michael Phillips. Like, oh yeah, I followed the Michael Phillips book, just like a lot of people. I thought that he might just say like, oh yeah, I've heard of that guy. And instead it's a huge part of your story.
Yeah.
Wow, I did not realize that when I brought that up, but that's fascinating.
Missed the guy for sure. He was a character for sure too as well. And I was finally figuring out how to do cider. He used to get quite cantankerous about why people weren't buying his apples. And I was like, dude, you live in the middle of nowhere. It's a schlep and you can't send your apples in the mail. Let's try cider. So he started building his cider press there.
And did you have any connection to agriculture when you were much younger, or was there interest there?
No, I originally from the UK, I would say, we grew up around, the world of allotments post-World War II, where, a lot of households in a large part of the country were some way connected to the ground, right, and producing your own. And, I definitely, like a lot of people, even today, right, they go, I remember when a strawberry actually tasted like a strawberry and, or whatever, a cucumber, it tasted different back then. Obviously taste is such an indicator of nutrient density, as, for us as well. So, there's that long-standing piece, and then getting into holistic orchard management was the big jump for me.
Do you see that word nutrient density becoming more and more of a? Do you think it has marketing power? Forward,
if we can substantiate it, right? I think.
Weren't you guys working on something to kind of bridge those two?
Yeah,
because how do you say that this is more nutrient dense than that? And how do you certify that? And is that something that's still in the cards?
Yeah, I mean, obviously Dan's Kittredge has been doing a lot of work there, and it's an incredibly complicated process to map out all those pieces, and frankly, way above my pay grade.
Yeah.
But perhaps more relevant is while we've had some of the best fruit scores in the States as a consequence of our work. So all fruit gets graded for quality, size, etc. and stuff. And we've taken some of the orchards there from, general low scoring to some top 2, top 3, top 4.
Even an example of one? I think you mentioned the citrus one before.
Yeah, and then the citrus is newer. So our good friend Herb Young, who comes back from the conventional world and research trialing world, purchased not that long ago, I think 4 or 5 years ago, a small set up a small citrus grove in Georgia, and with his clinical trialing mind started to figure out how regenerative farming could prove out different things. Especially citrus industry globally now is getting really stuck with a problem called citrus greening, which is a whole nother conversation, but essentially causes complete death of the tree over time. And oranges and citrus don't get past that green stage. So he was really vested, being so close to Florida, in additional research to figure that out. And he started to see really great results in his research. We started also working with him, utilizing SAP analysis and providing AEA products for him to really move the needle further forward. And just recently, he had his last year's crop, his citrus, tested next to a conventional store-bought citrus, sent them off to a lab, very expensive testing. They tested the whole profile. His came back and just even blew his mind. John recently interviewed him, but his nutrient levels are like way off the charts. You've got times 4, times 8, times 30 levels of different nutrients. And so I think, to your point, the future is how can we connect the consumer to that kind of information?
Yeah.
Because even we were talking about this. We've all seen some pretty gnarly looking organic produce that doesn't look particularly great. And we've seen some really great looking conventional produce. So then the question becomes, okay, everybody in the organic movement, we don't want toxins over our food, but how can we take it to the next level and get nutrient density and have the security or the assurance that what I'm perhaps paying even premium for, can be substantiated? Because, we can then start having that conversation around as food as medicine, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, that would be the building block, because it would it would kind of like open the curtain.
Yeah, remove the veil.
We see what's going on.
Yeah.
Which, as of now,
exactly,
it's marketing.
Yeah, and
it's marketing. It's the quality for sure, but it's mostly the marketing and the labels.
And intuition is not enough for some. Because for a lot of us, we intuitively just pretty much believe it.
Yeah.
But for a lot of others, they're like, nope, I need proof. Yeah.
And obviously a lot of this can be, we can all go back to our taste buds and our sense of smell from the aromatics, etc. There are good things. Our kids sometimes that haven't been programmed to believe X over Y, right, are also great indicators to say, hey, this is good for me.
The guys in the kitchen.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
I believe it.
Yeah. They have this palate where they come and they taste in the garden. I show them different things. They have something that is very unique and different.
Yeah.
And
molybdenum.
I would say that. But
get your molybdenum here.
It's like, because it's connected to flavor.
Yeah.
Exactly. Nutrients, density is connected to flavor. So they strongly connect to that. Also, it's like,
I think I said this when we met in Germany. There's no such thing as cheap fertilizer anymore because of the downstream costs, right? We'll be paying for it in pesticides and fungicides. And there's no such thing as cheap food anymore.
But that was the racket.
Yeah, that was the racket.
Yeah, exactly how they were making tons of money, and still today.
Yeah, and there's no such thing as cheap food, right? What we pay in the grocery stores that's not good for us, we end up paying for in medical bills. And so we've got to move to this conversation around nutrient density, and we've got to be able to reward the market and the growers producing for that. And if we can all band together from the science's point of view to support this should be just normal.
Yeah.
Right? Eventually, this should just be what market prices are. There is no premium because everybody's doing it, right? And it's just well-rewarded farmers doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
But it should be normal. There should be no other piece to compare to.
Man, could you imagine that?
Yeah, like this is the future we need to imagine.
Yeah.
There's going to be hurdles, but Yeah, there's a lot of us working on these issues.
Yeah. Better together.
Better together.
That's for sure.
Yeah. What's your slogan about better together? And
So alone you can go fast. Together we can go far.
Yeah.
That's actually the slogan that we have at the Canopy Retreat program.
Mm.
It's like we're building a community, a network of international people that are tight.
yeah.
Yeah. It's a big deal.
And you're part of it.
Yeah. That's right.
I have one more thing I want to touch on before rapid fire, which was,
Does he know about rapid fire?
I know nothing.
You'll figure it out. It's our segment, how we close out the show. But I want to talk a bit about your traveling, because you've traveled a lot in your work, and therefore you've seen a lot of things that perhaps a lot of people, again, I'm really thinking about the market gardener in my head, just because that's so many people listening that come from this world. What's something you've seen that's, what do you see that everywhere you go, you see the same thing? And then the opposite. What are some things that you're like, whoa, this is super different, and I was surprised me? But I guess I'm trying to, like, what are the things that unify all of us around the world? That it doesn't matter if you go to India or here, you see a similar issue or a similar challenge or a similar thing that brings people together. I just want to hear some wisdom you've gained from these travels.
The one biggest common denominator that I think is true for me so far globally is most people think that the products that they're using, the inputs that they're using, work more than they actually do.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I've seen this more. We did this recently in Mexico, and I mentioned this a while ago, I think even on our podcast with John, we did 4 sap tests with one of the large tomato producers in Mexico for the U.S. market. And after 4 sap tests, I went to the CEO of the company and said, so the good news is we've discovered the problem. The bad news is that none of your micronutrients are working at all. And in this kind of production, for people that maybe are less familiar with, almost 365 greenhouse production, is most of the nutrition, some of it's in soil, some of it's in substrate, is being triggered by EC meter. So it basically pulses the fertility based on the EC and a number of other pieces there. And so there's a lot of fertility going in every single day, sitting in a tank, ready to go into these crops. And so when you're pushing certain nutrients every day for the most part of the year, because you have almost all year round production, and you think it's doing something and it turns out it's not, that's a big deal. So after that, we hadn't even started with our products, and we saved them 30% in their budget just for making those changes.
That call.
Yeah.
Primarily because the product they were using was not good, or because of something else they're doing was not making it available?
Yeah. So some of the products weren't working at all, so they had to revisit that, and then that also impacted other application rates as well, and types of products being used. Speaking of the types of products, globally, we're using the wrong forms of products. Again, mostly because it's cheap. There's cal nitrate, ammonium nitrate, potassium chloride instead of sulfate and stuff. And there's a place for some of those judiciously, but generally, if they're like 90% of your production input, like you're getting a downstream negative more than you realize.
Yeah.
It's like everyone drinking Red Bull.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's like, keep drinking it, buddy, but it's actually not getting you where you want to go.
That's right. Check in with your heart at the end of the year.
And what have you seen that surprised you the most in any travel? I guess, regarding agriculture. And
it's the unsung hero thing. There's more people out there doing amazing stuff that have never been on a podcast. Nobody knows. They're not a U.S. celebrity. Yeah, exactly. And they've just been grinding it, and they've been doing amazing stuff even for, over a decade. And that's important. And we need to do a better job of, just celebrating, the fact that there's amazing people out there just doing it that haven't got the recognition or the exposure that some of us have had the privilege to get. So, yeah.
That's an interesting point. For a lot of people, if they're stuck on that phone world, they might get it in their head that what they don't see doesn't exist.
Yeah.
It's like there's a lot out there, isn't there?
Yeah, there really is.
Yeah, I had 15 good years under my belt before I started to.
Yeah, right.
Mm-hmm.
And 7 of those were on a pretty big farm, training people and doing stuff. And yeah, I think that the wisdom of farming teaches you a lot of things, and you definitely need to pass it on. But social media might not be for everyone. And
Yeah,
it shouldn't.
yeah.
It should be
Right.
for everyone.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Rapid fire.
Rapid
All right.
fire.
I'm going to give you our first question, but I'm going to give 2 different versions of it. You can choose how you want to answer. So what's a book you've either read multiple times or just one that you think about, that you've thought about a lot recently that keeps coming to you? Something, I don't know, maybe a new book you read in recent years that's always resurfacing, or just any book you want to.
Specifically within ag, huh?
No.
Don't necessarily have to be.
No, we're talking about you.
Wow. Okay. What have I been rereading a lot? Were very impactful. I mean, I'm a spiritual guy, so I have a lot of kind of spiritual type, metaphysical type books in my collection as well. I think that's really important.
Can you name one?
The one that's really interesting for me at the moment is called Borderlines by a guy called Daniel Boyarin. And he's a Talmudic scholar that re-examines the Second Temple period and says basically, looks like Christianity and Judaism wasn't that dissimilar in that period of time.
Wow,
you know, even the ideas of multiple expressions of the same one God and stuff like that. So that was pretty interesting. He just goes into this thing about how we create these cultures of heresy that sort of divide us when
So
actually...
it's like a theological history book?
Yeah,
sort of?
exactly. Yeah,
cool.
In a nutshell. So that, that's a really interesting one for me, especially coming back from Israel after not being there for 20 years. And
you spent time in Israel in the past?
Yeah, lived in the Middle East for about 10 years. About a large chunk of that was in Israel. So yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah. So that's been a big part of
Nice.
non-scientific plant books and agricultural books. And my wife always says, you still need to read more fiction.
Is there an agricultural book that comes to mind too?
Yeah, I mean, anything by Don Huber. There's some, staples in ours, plant nutrition and disease, micronutrients and plant disease. That's kind of like a staple for all our agronomy team to read.
Are these Acre books or not?
You probably can get them at Acres, yeah.
But I know Acres has a collection of books.
Yeah.
But that's not that specifically.
No,
Okay.
yeah.
I never heard about that.
Yeah, Arden Anderson and Gary Zimmer, they're really good go-to books that kind of tie in the world of biology and chemistry. I mean, that was a big part of, John's founding of AEA was like, turns out disciplines, specialists don't do a good job of always speaking to other people outside of that. It's kind of like the echo chamber thing we talked about. And so when you get a geologist to be able to impart their knowledge and for the chemist and the biologist to hear, I mean, those are the 3 underpinnings of agriculture right there, right?
Yeah.
Soil geology, chemistry, and biology.
Yeah.
Getting a perspective of how all those 3 work together. That's kind of made up most of my agricultural books.
Yeah. What's advice you heard when you were really young, could be a teenager, childhood, early 20s, that you only appreciated much, much later in life? You didn't appreciate it at first.
I don't know so much advice as a sort of a practical example my parents gave me by trying to take us different places to experience different cultures and worldviews, right?
It worked.
It worked. Yeah. Turns out here I am.
But at the time you didn't.
Oh, no. I mean, so my dad and his dad before him, they both used to work for British Airways, the airlines. And so we would always get these last minute work deals. He could, we could go to Vienna for the day. And all I remember at the time was like, I got up at stupid o'clock in the morning as a kid. And the day was spent where my arm was practically out of its socket at the shoulder because mom was dragging us around to see all of these different things and experience that. It's like even like old ruins and castles and stuff. But like now, super appreciated they did that and maybe somewhat apologetic for being a bit of a brat about it at the time now and the hard time I gave my parents probably. But yeah, well, I mean, that worldview, and because of that all led to traveling by myself and seeing different places, and now traveling for what I do. Yeah,
I know it.
Amazing.
Yeah,
I know what you mean. All the places I visited as a child, I wish I could visit them again now.
Yeah,
just because then I really didn't
appreciate it right
the way I can now. It's like, what? You were there, man. You missed it with your little child brain. Okay. What advice do you give often to people about anything? I know that's very broad.
Yeah. What advice do I give people? Figure out what your top 3 goals are and your top 3 challenges are. As simple as it sounds, in the context of farming, so many people haven't identified for themselves what they are. They haven't posed that question to themselves.
Could you share an example of one of those for yourself and your orchard?
Yeah.
Not all 3, but maybe one on each side.
So one of my top limiting factors was availability of calcium, availability of iron and manganese for sure, even though it should be theoretically all there in the soil. And then the one of the top goals was getting that plant health pyramid because of those pesky Japanese beetles that kept reminding me every year, like how badly it can suck trying to do things naturally. So,
were they a problem at
no? They're never a problem because they eat the leaves of the vines. We don't grow grapes.
Yeah.
We do.
Yeah.
And this is grape region here.
Yeah.
And on certain flower, I know Chloe at Flora Mama definitely battled them a bit.
Yeah.
Because they were going for...
We lure them with these baits, these pheromone baits.
Yeah.
And I never really... Do I put the bait in the garden or in the neighbor's garden? I'm never quite sure.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. And do I feed them to the chickens?
Yeah.
We get a lot of them.
Yeah.
What are people not talking about enough?
Being who's out there rewarding people for growing certain ways. Whether it's supply chain brands that are willing to pay more, or whether it's investment opportunities, grants that are potentially available for farmers wanting to do things the right way. That's a huge conversation. Farms just don't even know that there's resources and potential funding out there for what they want to do, even in this current climate. You know, yeah.
Or that the J curve doesn't have to be a thing.
The J curve doesn't have to be a thing. Yeah.
What's a nature experience that sticks out in your memory from your lifetime?
Oh man, so many. And water trails in Israel in my 20 years ago through En-Gedi, where King David hid from Saul,
Wow.
that kind of stuff there, to time spent in Ethiopia where I've seen some of the richest kids who had nothing being so content kicking around empty cans and playing with trash, but more content than a kid who was never happy with Xbox games.
Yeah. That's so incredible.
Yeah. And I say that because that's part of the nature. We're not separate from nature.
Yeah.
We exist on the same planet and interact in so many different ways. So
Have you seen coffee growing there?
Yeah. They have the real deal ceremony where it's thick black mud, which for every coffee connoisseur doesn't always go down well. They tend to the boutique coffee bars want to finesse it and have all of these different nuances of flavors, which has its place. But the Ethiopians are just like, give it to me heavy, dark, and black. Give me.
It's like or a Turkish coffee, right? It's
exactly
heavy coffee. What's a great difficult decision you've made, like a decision that was really hard to make, but it turned out for the better in the end and put you onto something better? And you can answer that however you want.
Yeah, I think sticking to our guns to be flexible with the way we tried to solve Asher, our oldest son's health, and how we were going to come alongside that and persevere on the nutrition side.
That must have been difficult.
Yeah.
It's a leap of faith.
Yeah, and even now, right? Some of the medicinal options have pretty significant downstream effects. where to get him, arthritis free right now might mean later on more serious disease, a cancer or sterility, or and so trying to use the best of both worlds without ruling stuff out. We could have gone die hard, all natural, and never seen it got out of control, and then risk permanent joint damage. So we've tried to figure out how to use the nasty stuff as quickly and as efficiently as possible and get him onto all of the other things that are going to give him continued managed health, like nutrition and high doses of vitamin D is what we're doing right now as well. So, and it's just giving yourself a level of forgiveness for getting it wrong or potentially getting it wrong, but recognizing you're trying to do it from your father heart, your mother heart of wanting the best for your kids. Yeah.
What's something that you're really obsessed with at the moment? Something that really, but something maybe a little bit different, something that's not necessarily what we've talked about today.
Yeah.
Something else.
Obsessed with, oh man. My own personal health, traveling so much.
Oh my God.
It's front and center, right? It's a thing.
We can talk about that at dinner tonight.
Yeah. If only every airport had the restaurant that was here.
Fasting is the only way to do it.
It really is. Yeah.
And it's hard because we have nothing else to do than eat.
Yeah. Yeah. Trying to stay in ketosis and in intermittent fasting, or just avoiding, waiting, enduring, going hungry until you get home and you can, control what goes into your body again. Yeah.
And final one, it's a bit similar, but is there just something, either a hobby or just a passion of yours, an interest that a lot of people maybe don't know or might even surprise them, or it's just different, something we haven't spoken about?
Yeah, I had a brief spell in my early 20s as a musician, and
okay. I'm a musician too. Similar. Back then I played.
Okay.
Now not so much.
So my first band out of college was with a girl called Mila Jovovich, who's now a famous actress, and
Nice.
What? Yeah, Resident Evil, right? Yeah. So
And
she had a music career for a little bit, huh?
Was she in Fifth Element too?
Yeah, Fifth Element.
Yeah,
That's right.
of course.
Yeah.
Wow, you were. That's quite a story.
Claim to fame.
That's your fun fact.
Do you still remember me, Mila?
Fun fact.
If you're listening.
Oh, wow, okay.
So there's a few guitars in my basement, and that's a passion of mine still. Like
Nice
writing, and even if it's not, if it's for the audience of one, that's a big part of who I am too. So
Excellent.
Well, that's great. Well, that's going to wrap our conversation. Thank you, Kish, for being here. Thank you, Chris. This week was fun.
Yeah.
Reconnect, and it's a great conversation we've had. I hope you guys are doing well. I hope you guys are liking the podcast. Send us your comment. We read them. We acknowledge them. If you think this podcast has value, please share it with your other farmer friends or with your community. These conversations are important. We want to keep having more and more of these. And if there's anything else.
Yeah, give us our feedback because, I must say it fills our cup to read.
Like and subscribe to the channel. We'll see you next time, friends. I hope you guys are well. We're out.